Good morning, Sangha. I've recorded this talk um, to leave you with some wisdom of Zen. I haven't spoken to the Sangha for quite some time due to my distance. So recently I've been asked to leave a talk for the members. Zen has been pretty much left to the centuries old and passed down through the ages, mostly by male Zen masters. Vietnam had a rich tradition of Zen masters coming from not just male monasticism, but also from Bhikkhunis, from female Zen masters. A famous Bhikkhuni, female monastic Zen master, uh, Sister Nhan, in the 10th century, had a lot of following among her students and disciples. She left a timeless poem about death and old age to her disciple, about the impermanence of life that we all face, that we all seek to avoid. Birth, old age, sickness, death. It has been the rule since immemorial. The more one hopes to escape, the more one is caught in the net. Due to confusion, one seeks the Buddha. Due to errors, one run after Zen. Seeking neither the Buddha nor Zen, lips purse, saying nothing. So this poem is very relevant during her time in the 10th century, and it's also still very relevant to our time, especially in the modern time when life seems to last a long time. As a young person, we chase success, we chase fame and fortune in our 20s, chase to find our place in the world. In our 30s, we chase to build a career, we chase to gain some sort of recognition or standing in society. Into our 40s, we chase to hold back the clock of time. And, we realize that our bodies, our minds, our memories, everything has started to slow down. So we chase to regain or push back time to keep our youthfulness. So whole industry is built up around this. We chase to, and into our midlife and further on, we chase to, maintain and regain our health, and to live forever. So science has really been funded by all these desires of human being from time immemorial to avoid the true cycle of life that ultimately it's unavoidable. When I was a child, I realized that life was very strange. Adults would go about chasing things, doing things, keeping themselves very busy for things that didn't really matter. What really mattered was, for me as a kid, was food. And that was pretty basic. And I realized today that food and shelter is still something that matters, and it can be taken care of quite easily, and it's still very basic. But if we kept to the basics, most of us wouldn't be suffering. Desire is one of those things that causes an immense amount of suffering. And one of those very fundamental basic desire is to fight back from birth, death, old age, and illness. And this is the four things that the Buddha saw before he embarked on his journey to become the Buddha when he was Siddhartha as a prince. He saw that these four things in life are unavoidable. So he seek, just like all of us, once we started to recognize the truth of life, we all seek to avoid it, to get out of it. So if science, if society, if normal life cannot find or give us the answer, then we run to religion, mysticism, spirituality. We run to Zen to find a way to solve these ultimate questions, to find a way to solve these ultimate mysteries, and hopefully to avoid them. Surprise, surprise, when you come to Zen, you learn that the first thing is that you're taught to not avoid anything. And I've done a fair amount of avoiding in my first 10 years of practicing Zen. You hopefully that when you sit and you meditate, that you can avoid all the things that come up. Hopefully, if you ignore them, if you push them away, or if you just pretend that it's not there, it'll go away, and then you'll be in some sort of beautiful state of bliss, and the suffering will be gone forever. That's not how it works. The opposite is true with Rinzai Zen. See, with Rinzai Zen, at first, we're taught to be aware of our breath, aware of our mind wandering, aware of everything that's going on, and aware of our own clarity of mind or awareness. And then we're taught to face all the difficult parts that we were there in the first place to try to avoid. So you run to Zen, to hope to avoid suffering, avoid the pain of being alive, avoid the pain of being human. And then eventually you find out, the more you practice Zen, is that these things are unavoidable. And the more you avoid it, the more you suffer. And then you realize that suffering actually is optional. The reason why we suffer is because we're avoiding these things. Our suffering is created by the fact that we're not acceptance of life. We're not accepting life as it is. We're not accepting life as it unfolds, and we're not accepting the impermanence of life that comes in a full circle of death, old age, illness. That comes in a full circle of birth, old age, illness, and death. I was given a wonderful gift as a child, and I think a lot of people looked at it as a curse, but for me, it was a wonderful gift. Because I was born after the Vietnam War, And my mother had, she had me. She was pregnant with me during the most tumultuous years of the war, which is, the ending of the war, where there was a huge transition. And when I was born, my father was sent off to, concentration camps, and nobody in my family knew that he was going to come back or not. So all the five siblings in my household, I was the most ill one, um, because of the fact that during conception, my mother was very stressed out and very anxious and suffering a lot, which affected the fetus, me. So since I was born, I was quite a fragile child. I have childhood asthma. And during the end of Vietnam War and during the 10 years after the Vietnam War, the US had a trade embargo on Vietnam, where there was no food or medicine or anything brought into Vietnam from other countries who had any relations with the US. So therefore, Vietnam didn't have medicine. I had asthma in the middle of the whole thing, and there was no Ventolin, no nothing for asthma. So whenever I have an asthma attack as a child, I would sit there and wheeze and wait until it calms down. And that could take hours or half a day. And many times, each breath that I took was something quite precious. I came to realize that very quickly. So the Buddha's teaching of impermanence and death and life has been very fragile was very relevant to me, because as soon as I, breathe out that I can't breathe in, I'll be dead. At once there was a Zen master. He was asked, you know, uh, well, how long does life last? And his student says it lasts 100 years, and he says no. And his student says, well, maybe 50 years. He says no, even shorter. And his student says maybe 10 years. He said no, it's one breath. If you breathe out and you can't breathe in, your life is gone. That's how fragile life is. And that gift I was given as a child to realize the fragility of life very, very early. Then I looked around me. Everyone was going around behaving as if life lasts forever. And I think that I thought to myself at that time, that was the biggest lie of it all. So when I came to Zen as a child, there's outside a Zen monasteries, or any Zen practice place. There's a sign, and it says, life and death is the greatest, sort of greatest thing in life. Don't let it pass you by. Each day is your life draining away. You don't know how relevant that is to me as a person who has asthma as a child with no medicine. So my greatest gift in life was asthma, and my greatest curse for the longest time was asthma. But any moment, I realized if I breathe out and I can't breathe in, my life would be gone. I didn't have to wait until, old age, or I didn't have to wait until old age and serious illness or suffering before death comes. Matter of fact, I had friends in high school who died of asthma. Or my mother has friends whose daughter died of asthma in her 30s. So I looked around myself. There was many people around me in my community in Toronto where I was growing up. That death was nothing that is going to wait for you. It can happen anytime. And so this energized my Zen practice. I realized that there wasn't a lot of time for me to figure out the greatest mysteries of life. And I had to figure this out. And when I did forget that, death and birth is just a moment away, um, life comes and serves me serious reminders about it. My father passed away when I was in my mid-20s. And that energized my Zen practice again, realizing that, okay, now I have the medicine for asthma, but, death is not something that's far away. It touches you. It touches your family. It touches the people around you. You can choose to ignore it, or you can choose to face it head on and solve the most important, probably the most important philosophical and mystical questions of life, which is, what is it? Why we're here? And for the Buddha, that question was the end of suffering. And for me, that question was, who am I? Why am I here? So Zen is a contemplative tradition of Buddhism. It has been practiced and passed down for thousands of years with rigorous method. And during these times, when we're faced with impermanence, with death, with suffering, what do we do? Well, as any good Zen practitioner will tell you, you get on your cushion and you look at it. Those times are the time best to observe, to contemplate about the big questions of life, because those are the times that you realize it's unavoidable. Normal life, you can always find ways to distract yourself. You can always find ways to lie to yourself that life will go on forever. But when you face death, when you are faced with the life and death situations of people around you, you realize that, it could happen to you. Existentially, we are here at the grace of the mystery. And however long that we're here, we really don't know. So whatever we accumulate, whatever we think we have, none of that matters. At the end of the day, it might just go away in a second that, you don't take your breath in again when you breathe out. So that's why Buddhism starts with the contemplation of the breath, using the breath as a grounding measure for the attention practice. In all types of Buddhism, contemplative practice, we start with the breath. In Zen, we start with the breath as well. We notice the breath. We use the breath as grounding. And every time we breathe in and out, we realize that we are being gifted this gift of life that is so fragile that we fail to capture, to understand that all it takes is one breath out, not coming in, then our life ends. Our experience, our ride of, this reality is gone. So, after practicing Zen for probably some time, 10 years, 15 years, I don't know, for me it was over 10 years, I realized that the real practice of Zen is about the contemplation of death. I know it sounds really grim. And I'm pretty sure if you talk to beginners coming into Zen, that the real practice of Zen is a contemplation of death, on death. No one would ever even imagine coming to practice Zen at all. If I was told like that in the beginning, I'm pretty sure I will not start my Zen practice. So the real contemplation of Zen uh, is the contemplation on death. In 2016, when I went to Vietnam and did my 4-month solitary retreats at the Zen mountain, uh, you know, at the abbot there that allowed me to use his hermitage. He had a monastery, a small monastery in the mountains in central Vietnam. And before and after I went into the retreat, we would sit and have tea and talk in the evening after dinner. And the abbot, he was a very nice man. He had lived in that mountain for 20 years. He had done solitary practice, living on the peak of that mountain where my hermitage that I was using for that retreat during that year was. And he basically stayed in that mountain and meditated for 20 years. And he told me something that really stuck with me. He said, a Zen practitioner is like a dead person. We use this dead body to experience life. And what life is the present moment. So a Zen practitioner is like a dead birth person. We use this dead body to experience the present moment. Wow, that's really profound and shocking. how is this, in any way positive at all? Okay. Let me share with you why this is something that is mind-blowing and very positive to my life and has been for quite some time now. For you see, when you look at death, death is the greatest equalizer. Huh? We are born with nothing. When we are born into this life, we have nothing. We are at a point where everyone is the same. We are a crying, baby that came out with life with nothing in our hands. And when we die, we take nothing with us. That is the greatest equalizer. No matter if you're rich, you're poor, you're educated, you're uneducated, you're smart, you're dumb, you've got high IQ, low IQ, you're a happy person, you're an unhappy person, whatever, accumulation that you have gained in life, you can't bring it with you. Nothing, absolutely nothing. Everything is gone. At the moment of death, we are, in essence, all equal. It is the greatest equalizer in life. So what does it mean to die in the present moment, like that monk said? What does it mean by already dead? A Zen practitioner being someone who's already dead. What does it mean? Does it mean that we're just we're just zombies walking around? Seem like a very positive thing to be thinking about. No, well, that's not what he means at all. What it means is that we are to let go of everything that we thought life is about. At every moment, when a person dies, they have nothing. It's the greatest equalizer. Everybody comes to nothing. Everything that you have attached yourself to, your family, your friends, your possessions, the things you think you accumulate, your ego, you pile on all of these ideas that you own something, that you have something, that you are something. And at the end, when you face death, none of that matters because none of that is real. None of that is anything. So the greatest equalizer for human being is death. We come to become nothing. And why is it such a freedom to be already dead, to have nothing, to be nothing? Well, first of all, you don't have to work so hard to reinforce that ego. So if somebody tells you you're a good person, you don't have to work so hard to reinforce that idea that you're a good person. So, at each moment, whatever arises, whatever needs to be done, you just do it, irregardless of any ideas that you have in your head about who you are. So you let go of all those ideas. You're a bad person. Okay, that is a really painful idea to have as an ego, but many people walk around with that idea, strongly embedded in their psyche that they're somehow defective or broken or not so good. And when you release that idea and you realize, wait a minute, I'm neither good or bad. I'm just here. I'm neither good or bad. I'm just like nothing. I'm just here. I'm just like human being. I'm just being. And so there's a great freedom in that, in being nothing, in just residing in that nothingness. And in that nothingness, incredibly, you are very responsive to life. Life happens, and you're flexible enough to not be attached to any sort of ideas in your head about what life is, that you can respond to the present moment as needed be. So, if you say, for example, if you were walking on the street and you saw a beggar, right, and you wearing a $2,000 suit, Armani suit or something, and you're a high profile person, with all of your ideas attached to being a rich, high profile person, would you sit down with that beggar and have a coffee? Absolutely not. Because you're so attached to that idea, that so it restricts you from having the freedom to actually enjoy that present moment, however it arises, right? And I've done that. I've sat down with people on the street, have a cup of coffee and a chat, um, you know, and it's one of the most liberating things to do. Serendipity, things just happen. Uh, so it's all of our ideas in our head about what reality is, that is causing our suffering, our attachment to all of these ideas. Uh, it's great to have ideas. I strongly recommend them. Except that don't be attached to them. Be willing to let go of any ideas that you have. And one of the fundamental part of the Zen practice is living in this non-attached reality, living in this non-attached state. Well, I wouldn't call it state because their states come and go. You're not attached to that either. Uh, it's living in this freedom of non-attachment, right? Because guess what? There's some really good meditative states that come and go as well when you practice Zen. And if you're attached to that, you're in trouble too. So, when we encounter death, uh, especially, death of our family, death of our friends, death of people who we know around us, there is great pain and suffering. Why do we have pain and suffering? Well, that great pain and suffering comes from our attachment to all the memory, to the loss, uh, our unwillingness to let go of the past moment, our regrets about things we have done and things we haven't done with that person. And we're attached to all of that ideas. It is a practice then, when we suffer, is to get on the cushion and examine our attachment to all of this. I remember after my father died, I had 10 months of observation of all of my attachments towards him, towards his life, towards what he meant in my life. And that observation led to my Kensho. I had to observe all the ideas that I was attached to the Dharma itself, all the knowledge that I thought I gained in the Dharma, in learning the Dharma, in learning it academically, and learning it experientially through the Zen practice. And then I realized that none of that matters, because at the end of the day, I was still suffering. I was still suffering. And what really matters is that I had to solve the number one existential question that had bugged me for over 13 years up to that point. Who am I? Because if I didn't solve that question, at any moment I realized I could have an asthma attack and nobody's around and I could die. And so my life would be wasted. My life would be entirely wasted to not be able to understand the most important question in life that I had at that point. So I contemplated on my father's death. I contemplated on the moments before he died. I contemplated on what it would be like if I die. And all of that brought me to the point where I started to let go. I started to let go all the preconception that I had about life. I started to let go all of the emotions that I have about the past, regrets. I started to let go of all my ways of trying to change and control the past and relationships. I started to let go of all my ideas about what life is. It was that letting go. It was that letting go until there's nothing left to let go. That is the journey of what you call conscious death. That's the Zen practice. That's facing death. And Zen, death is a contemplation. Even in Theravada Buddhism, there is a death contemplation practice where disciples of the Buddha are asked to go into the forest where people left dead bodies at that time. During the Buddha's time, people didn't bury their dead. They would bring their dead into the forest, certain areas of the forest, and they would leave them there for the body to decompose and have its own natural course. So the monks would go into the forest and meditate on death. Each day coming to the forest to observe the slow disintegration of the body. And as they see the body disintegrate, they become non-attached to the body. They become slowly non-attached to a lot of things in life. Now, this is not a practice to make yourself, rejecting life. It's actually the opposite. It's a practice for you to embrace life. The question I always ask people, some of my close friends and other Zen practitioners, is If you have a week to live, what would you do? If you have a day to live, what would you do? If you have just an hour to live, or the next 5 minutes to live, what would you do? And it's shocking because many people have never thought of this question. They go on life pretending that it lasts forever, that we would somehow live forever. And it's contemplation of these questions that is, the ultimate equalizer. If you can figure out, this question, you will be able to live life fully without any regrets at all. So the practice of Zen is not to push away the realities of life, the impermanence of life. It is not to push away the most feared part of life, which is death, but to embrace those, natural cycle of life as are an experience, to embrace those natural part of life as the liberating core of our practice. As you know, as a kid, we love stories. I was told these stories as a kid, and there's a lot of folk tales and Zen stories in Vietnam when I was growing up. We call it Dharma stories. So one of the folk stories in Vietnam was like this. One day, this guy, he died, and he went to hell, and the king of hell, he would line up at to see the king of hell, and when he encountered the king of hell, the king of hell says, "Well, what would you like to ask me?" And he said, "Listen, you didn't give me any warning that, I was going to die. This is not fair. You got to send me back." And the king of hell said, "What? I didn't give you any warning? I gave you plenty warning." And he said, "What do you mean?" And the king of hell says, "The first warning I gave you was your neighbor, down a couple of block down. He died when he was a child, and he was one of your friends when you were growing up playing in the block. So you realize that death is, very present." "Oh," he says, I didn't pay attention. I didn't notice. But then that's not fair. I was a child. I didn't know what was going on. So that is not a good warning. The king of hell says, "No, no, 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 no. I gave you another warning. Okay? When you grow up, and you went out to society and you worked, at your workplace, once in a while, someone would have a family member that passed away and you would go to the funeral. That is another warning." And he says, "No, no, 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 no. That's not fair. That's so far away from me. That's so removed from me. It's not fair. It's not a good warning." So the king of hell says, "You know what? This is a good warning. Your parents passed away one by one. You didn't realize that." And he said, "No, no, 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 no. That's not fair either. My parents were really old by the time they passed away. So I'm still young." And the king of hell says, "Look, you got gray hair. I gave you that. That was a warning. And what did you do with it? You dyed it. You covered it up. You ignored it." So the gentleman, in all of, he represents a part of normal human, how I say it, avoidance strategies to avoid the realities of life, to avoid the discomfort that comes with contemplation of death. we basically, do these things and we ignore it and then we just move on. One of the things I realized when I came to Canada as a child was that funerals in Canada was really dreadful. When I was a child in Vietnam, funerals was a celebration. I would go to the neighbor's funeral of their grandfather, and there would be celebration for a few days. They would have the funeral, the coffin at home in their main room, and they would have throw a party around it. At night, there's entertainer that comes in and entertain the guests. And there's operas. That they would hire traveling bands of operas. Vietnamese traditional opera singers to come over and sing and entertain the guests. Now in Vietnam, they do the same thing, except they supplement it with a karaoke system. So for Vietnamese people, death and funerals were a celebration. It was something to celebrate in life. It was, a passage of normal human experience. So, the family is sad, but at the same time, the family is celebrating that person's life. The family is celebrating, that person's contribution, that person's part of life that has contributed to the richness and the depth of their own life. People would gather around and talk about, the deceased person and celebrate the good parts as well as the bad parts about them. And there is an ongoing celebration for probably 3-4 days that goes on with a funeral in Vietnam before that. I was growing up as a kid, and I visited and encountered it. So for me, when I came to Canada and I attended funeral in Canada, it was quite dreadful. There was only kind of like mourning, and then people kind of shoo away and just finish the funeral as quickly as possible, and kind of the family is left to deal with their own thing. Um, when I was a kid growing up in Vietnam, these were not the kind of thing that happens. The whole community comes together and talk about the deceased person and help the family mourn. So it was a very public thing versus funerals in Canada that became very, very private, and nothing is shared, nothing is talked about. It's people are left to their own private grieving. I found that culturally it was very different. More importantly, old age and death is something that is sort of shunned away and sort of hidden away from society. Society doesn't want to look at it. But in Asia, it's one of the things that it's people actually it's a part of life. It's a part of celebration of life. It's a part of rites of passage of life. So everybody is very culturally aware of funeral and death. In the Zen practice, we contemplate on death because without facing death, we really won't be able to find the truth meaning of life. Death is the greatest equalizer. All the attachment we will ever have in life, all the attachment we will ever have, thinking that makes us who we are in life, upon death, it all falls away. When I saw my father dying, and he died of cancer very quickly in 3 months after discovery that he had cancer. He was a very successful man. To me, he was, kind of a person I admired. And I saw all the things that around him start to fall away. I saw how much he tried to cling on to those attachments, and to no avail. Um, it it didn't do anything to help him face death. I realized that moment can come to any of us at any time. And the Buddhist practice, believe it or not, is about that moment. Our whole life is preparation for death. The Zen practice is about that moment. Our whole life is about dying into the present moment. And unless you are well prepared for that moment, you don't know what that means. You don't know what it means to die into the present moment. To live in the mystery that is life, with no attachment, with no idea of who you are, without any idea, okay? Without attaching to any idea about what the present moment is, what who you are at that moment, and who other people are. It's extremely freeing. Right? You can't describe it. It's very hard to describe what it's like to experience life that way. But the only way you can experience life that way is to contemplate on death. To face the existential question that throughout time immemorial human beings have been contemplating on. Except no amount of philosophizing, no amount of other people explaining to you is going to satisfy you. Why? Because until you answer these questions for yourself, no one, nothing will protect you from facing that existential dread. You can cling on to beliefs. You can cling on to success. You can cling on to the idea that, there's something out there. You can cling on to the idea that, everything that you think is you will buffer you against, facing that moment. But unless you're willing to face that head on, you won't ever find out what it's like. And you can have a Zen practice for 20 years, 30 years, and not ever, ever face this. Why? Because human beings have a great capacity for denial. We can deny the very nature of reality right in front of us, very well. So, believe me, each moment that we are alive is a gift. Is a gift, and it's a mystery. Because all the ideas that we ever have about life, all the things we ever achieved, everything that we thought about who we are, will not help us upon the moment of death. What is it like to really, truly being alive is but to die before you actually die? And when you do that, when you're able to do that, there's an incredible amount of freedom that comes with being alive. All the suffering, all the clinging, all the things that you ever thought that was important in life, that was important to you, has little effect. then you realize that, for the first time, you're actually truly alive. When you find out, oh gosh, I'm going to die. All the things that matter, that seem to matter, uh, it didn't make sense anymore. So what would you do if you know you only have a week to live? When I asked my friend that, he asked me back, what would you do? And I said, it's funny. I would go and plant some flowers in my mom's garden. I love tulips. Uh, I would make food together with her. Um, I really enjoy doing things like that together with her. I'd go to a psychology lecture because I'm just so curious about this subject for the longest time. Um, I'll go to a castle in Europe uh, and watch the sunset and invite a friend to come with me. And yeah, that's what I'll do if I have a week left to live. But the funny thing is, I've done all of that already. So if I die in this moment right now, I've got nothing to regret. And so you should ask yourself, what is really important for you? What is really, really important? The most important thing in your life. One time, I asked a Zen student to lay down on the floor and imagine if he's dying. And the first thing that came to his mind was, God, I didn't buy insurance yet. Leave some money for my wife and kids. Okay, that might be the most important thing for you. But then what next, right? What happens after that? What happens as you're dying? And, the contemplation on death is probably the most feared part in the contemplative practice, and the most liberating part of the contemplative practice of Zen. So, if you're ready to face life, I invite you to take on the death contemplation and face death. Because once you face death, you look death in the face, then you realize that life is a really beautiful, mysterious, awesome place. Huh? Once you face death, life itself is a gift. Everything about life is a gift. And so, if you can stay in that space, then there is no suffering. I want to take the moment to dedicate this merit that we have all come together to learn about the most transformative teaching of the Buddha, to understand that every moment is precious, to experience for ourselves what life is like when we face death. With this, the merits of this Dharma talk be dedicated to all beings. May all beings come to the realization of the truth and end their own suffering. May all beings be free.